Understood. You want me to take that part and expand it into a 1,200-word simple English narrative, written in an interesting, flowing style, without headings or extra notes. Just the story expansion, nothing else. Here's the expanded version. The alien colony had once been a place of life, peace, and hope. Families had built homes under the light of twin suns, children played in the wide green fields, and traders carried goods between starports that were always full of activity. The colony was proud of what it had achieved. It was far from its homeworld, but it was growing strong, a shining example of what their people could do. They believed the future was secure, but that hope was not meant to last. The first signs of danger came as whispers. Merchants spoke of a ruthless species moving from system to system, leaving nothing behind but ash and silence. These raiders were said to be merciless, wiping out every living being they encountered. Some dismissed the stories, calling them exaggerated tales meant to scare children or travelers. But when the first refugee ships arrived, broken and full of frightened survivors, the truth became impossible to deny. The enemy was real and they were coming. At first, the leaders of the colony tried to prepare. They strengthened their defenses, repaired old weapons, and trained volunteers to fight if necessary. Messages were sent to nearby worlds, begging for reinforcements, but none came. Their neighbors were too afraid, too far away, or simply unwilling to risk angering such a powerful enemy. Day by day, the colony realized it was standing alone. When the attack finally came, it was swift and brutal. The enemy fleet descended like a storm. Their ships were vast, dark shadows that blotted out the light of the suns, and their weapons cut through shields and armor with ease. The colony's small fleet tried to resist, but within hours it was reduced to burning wreckage. The ground shook as explosions tore through defense lines, and entire districts of the city went up in flames. Panic spread faster than any warning could be given. Families huddled together, praying for a miracle. Soldiers who had once spoken bravely now fought only to delay the inevitable. The enemy advanced relentlessly, and with each passing moment more lives were lost. The colony's leaders, who had sworn to protect their people, could only watch in despair as everything they had built began to crumble. Their speeches of courage fell silent, their plans in ruins. The invaders were known across the stars for their cruelty. They never left survivors. Whole planets had been erased, civilizations wiped from memory. To them, mercy was weakness, and weakness was something to be destroyed. The colonists knew what was coming. Soon there would be nothing left but ashes, just like all the others. In their darkest moment, when hope had nearly vanished, someone suggested one final act, a desperate signal sent far into the stars. It was not a message of strategy or negotiation. It was not even a request for soldiers or weapons. It was simply a plea for mercy. "We are dying," the message said. "If anyone hears us, please spare us. Show us kindness because we cannot save ourselves." They had no expectation that anyone would answer. Who would risk themselves for a doomed colony? Who would stand against such a ruthless foe? And even if someone did hear, what could they possibly do against an enemy so powerful? The signal was sent, but it felt like nothing more than a cry into the void. Days passed, and the situation grew worse. Entire cities were abandoned, with survivors fleeing underground. Food supplies dwindled, medical centers overflowed with the wounded, and fear became the air they breathed. Every sound of engines above could have been the final wave of destruction. People began to lose hope completely. Some whispered that their gods had abandoned them. Others believed no one had even heard their call. But far away, beyond the borders of known space, there were newcomers to the galaxy. They were spoken of in rumors, feared in theory, but not yet understood by most. They were called humanity. No one knew exactly what they wanted, or why they had come from their distant homeworld, but every story about them carried the same warning. They were from a death world, a planet so dangerous it forged predators out of its children. They survived against impossible odds, and they had brought that same will to the stars. When the colonists sent their desperate message, they never imagined it would reach humanity. They never imagined that of all the species in the galaxy, it would be the Deathworlders who would answer. To the colonists, the idea was terrifying. If the rumors were true, humans were not gentle beings. They were fierce, unpredictable, and dangerous. They did not offer mercy in the way others did. They had their own way of dealing with enemies, and it was never peaceful. Still, the message reached them. Somewhere on a human listening post, the call for mercy was heard. And to humanity, mercy did not mean surrender or words or negotiations. To them, Mercy meant protection, and protection meant war. As the colony's skies burned and their defenses collapsed, they did not yet know what was coming. They thought their message had vanished into the endless dark, forgotten by all. But something was moving, something faster and stronger than anything they had ever seen. Engines roared across the void, carrying ships built not for kindness but for survival. Ships that carried the banner of Earth. The colony had begged for mercy. What they were about to receive was something no one in the galaxy had ever seen before: the arrival of humanity's warships. For many days after the signal was sent, the colony waited in silence. Each hour felt like an eternity. People checked the skies every morning and every evening, hoping to see a friendly fleet, but none came. The leaders tried to keep their people calm, though their own hearts were heavy with despair. "Perhaps no one heard us," some whispered. Or maybe they heard, but they are too afraid to come. The colony slowly accepted the cruel truth. Their call for mercy had been ignored. They were alone. Then one day the scanners picked up something. At first it was faint, shadows moving against the backdrop of the stars. The technicians thought it was another enemy fleet preparing to finish the job, and panic spread quickly. But when the signals were decoded, they showed something unexpected. These ships were not the same as the raiders who had attacked before. Their shapes were different, their engines stronger, their weapons larger. The colonists gathered in fear and confusion. Who were these newcomers? Could they be allies? Or were they just another wave of killers drawn by the scent of weakness? Hope and dread twisted together in every heart as the unknown fleet drew closer. The first clear image appeared on the screens in the command center, and silence fell across the room. The ships were massive, armored beasts of steel, bristling with weapons. Their hulls glowed with strange markings and signals unlike anything the colony had seen before. Some had missile pods that jutted out like sharp claws, while others carried cannons so large they seemed able to split a planet in two. These were not ships of peace or negotiation. These were ships built for war. The colony's leaders froze, unsure of what to do. They had begged for mercy, for kindness, for a gentle hand to save them. What they had received instead was a fleet that screamed of violence. Whispers filled the command room. Who are they? Why are they here? Are we their next victims? No one had an answer. As the fleet descended into orbit, their presence could be felt across the entire world. Shadows from their colossal ships darkened cities below. People rushed into the streets to look up, fear gripping them tighter with every second. Some wept openly, believing the end had come at last. Others clung to the desperate hope that these strangers might still be saviors, even if they looked like monsters of steel. Word spread quickly of who they were. Rumors from distant traders had spoken of them before. Humans. A species from a death world, a planet so dangerous that its creatures lived every day fighting for survival. They were newcomers to the galaxy, mysterious and unpredictable, but every story shared one warning. Humans were not gentle. They were strong, fierce, and unafraid of war. The colonists remembered the message they had sent. It had not been a call for fighters. It had not been a challenge for warriors to come. It had been a plea for mercy. They had prayed for healers, for negotiators, for someone to stop the killing. Yet the Deathworlders who answered brought with them firepower beyond imagination. The tension in the air grew unbearable. No one knew if the humans had come to destroy or to save. Their warships hung in the skies like predators circling wounded prey. Every citizen of the colony felt the weight of their presence, their hearts pounding with fear. Children asked their parents if the new ships would kill them. Parents had no answers. The governors debated sending another message, begging these strangers not to harm them. But their voices shook with fear. Suddenly, the scanners lit up again. The human ships began to move. Their weapons powered on, glowing with deadly energy. The colony braced itself for annihilation, certain this was the end. Families clutched each other, soldiers took their final positions, and priests whispered last prayers. But the destruction did not fall on them. Instead, the humans opened fire on the raider fleet still orbiting nearby. What followed was chaos unlike anything the colonists had ever seen. Human missiles streaked across the void, their trails bright against the black of space. Cannons roared, sending blasts that tore enemy ships apart in seconds. The raiders, who had seemed unstoppable, were suddenly powerless against the fury of the newcomers. Ship after ship was ripped open, explosions filling the skies. The colonists watched in stunned silence as the war they thought was already lost was rewritten before their eyes. Still, fear did not vanish. The humans were clearly not there for peace. Their way of answering a plea for help was through war, and their war was absolute. To the colonists, it felt like inviting a storm to chase away a fire, only to be struck by lightning themselves. Were these beings truly saviors? Or had they just traded one conqueror for another? As the battle raged above, one truth became clear to everyone below. Humanity was not like any other species. They did not come with banners of peace or with words of comfort. They did not send diplomats or healers. They sent warships, monsters of metal and flame. And in their presence, the galaxy's rules seemed to bend and break. For the colonists, it was a moment they would never forget. They had begged for mercy, prayed for survival. What they had received instead was something terrifying and powerful. Humanity had come, not with gentle hands, but with weapons forged from the fires of their death world. It was mercy. Yes, but mercy wrapped in steel. Mercy that burned with fire. Mercy that could only be delivered through total war. And for the first time, the colony began to understand. This was the only kind of mercy humanity knew. The moment the human fleet began its attack, the skies became a battlefield of fire and steel. The raider blockade, which had looked so strong and unstoppable, was torn apart as if it were nothing more than paper. Human warships moved in perfect formation, each one covering the other, each strike calculated with precision. Their weapons were unleashed with terrifying power. Beams of energy cut through enemy hulls. Missiles tore apart entire squadrons, and explosions lit up the darkness of space like artificial suns. To the colonists watching from below, it looked like chaos unleashed, a storm that consumed everything in its path. But to the humans, this was not chaos. This was order, discipline, and the execution of a mission they understood very well. On the ground, the situation changed just as quickly. The raiders who had been pushing deeper into the colony's cities suddenly found themselves under attack from above. Human troop carriers descended through the atmosphere, their engines shaking the skies. They pierced the smoke and fire of the battlefield, landing with terrifying speed. From the ships emerged human soldiers in dark armor, carrying weapons the colonists had never seen before. They moved in teams, fast and sharp, covering every angle. Where the raiders expected frightened defenders, they met warriors bred on a death world. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives to fight in harsher conditions than this. The first clash was over in minutes. The raiders, used to facing weak resistance, were unprepared for such overwhelming force. Human weapons cut through them. Every shot precise, every movement deadly. Colonists who hid in the ruins watched in awe and fear as the soldiers of Earth advanced. They were not wild, reckless fighters. They were disciplined, coordinated, and merciless toward their enemies. To the colonists, it seemed like the humans were monsters of war, born only to destroy. But for the humans themselves, it was simply routine. This was their duty: protect those who could not protect themselves by any means necessary. The colonists could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had expected healers or negotiators, perhaps a fleet that would talk the raiders into retreat. Instead, they saw humans push forward without a single word of discussion. There were no warnings, no chances given, no offers of surrender. The enemy was treated as a disease, something that had to be cut out completely. And the humans cut with precision. Every street battle turned the same way. Raiders tried to hold their ground, setting up barricades and firing from rooftops, but the humans moved faster. They advanced under cover of smoke, throwing grenades that shattered defenses, then stormed positions with brutal efficiency. Their armor absorbed hits that would have killed others, and their discipline never faltered. If one soldier fell, another filled their place instantly. It was not chaos, it was a machine of survival and war. From above, human airships circled the cities, blasting enemy positions with surgical strikes. They destroyed raider command centers while avoiding civilian shelters, something that stunned the colonists. To the people, it looked like luck. How could such massive weapons avoid their homes? But it was not luck. The humans calculated every shot, every blast with perfect accuracy. They did not see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as guardians, standing between the weak and the predators who hunted them. The colonists could feel their world shifting. At first, fear dominated their hearts. The humans looked terrifying, their warships and weapons beyond anything they had known. But as the battle continued, another feeling began to grow: relief. For the first time since the attack began, the raiders were not advancing. They were retreating. For the first time, the colony was not alone. Yet the humans never slowed down. They did not stop to celebrate or reassure. They pressed forward, striking at every pocket of resistance. Their fleets in orbit chased the fleeing enemy ships, hunting them down without mercy. Every raider that tried to escape was pursued and destroyed. To humanity, leaving even a single threat alive meant risking the lives of the innocent. The colonists watched in both awe and unease. They had asked for mercy, and this was what mercy looked like through human eyes, a storm that erased the enemy completely. On the ground, colonists peeked from hiding places to see humans moving through their streets. The soldiers' faces were hidden behind helmets, their movements sharp and professional. They carried injured colonists to safety even as they fought, dragging survivors out of rubble and giving them water before moving on to the next target. The people began to realize something strange. Yes, the humans were terrifying, their weapons louder and deadlier than anything they had ever known. But those same hands that carried weapons also carried children to safety. Those same voices that shouted orders in battle also spoke gently to the wounded. The battle stretched on for hours, then days. To the colonists, it felt endless, but to the humans, it was only a mission. Every soldier moved with the same determination. Every ship followed its orders without hesitation. It was not cruelty, it was clarity. To them, war was not an option but a tool, a necessary act to protect life. And they would not stop until the job was done. By the time the last enemy ship was destroyed, the colony was in ruins, but it was still alive. Fires burned in the streets. Buildings were shattered and the people were scarred with loss. Yet the enemy who had promised to leave no survivors was gone. The humans had come like a storm, and in their wake the colony still stood. The colonists did not know whether to weep with gratitude or tremble with fear. The humans had saved them, but the way they had done it was unlike anything they had ever imagined. To the colonists it looked like chaos, destruction unleashed on a scale too great to understand, but to the humans it was simply another mission completed. They did not see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as protectors, and they had done what protectors must: defend the helpless, no matter the cost. For the first time, the galaxy would see clearly what it meant when humanity answered a call for help. It meant fury. It meant precision. It meant war. When the final blast echoed across the skies, silence fell upon the colony. The once bright horizon was covered with smoke, and the air smelled of ash and burning metal. The enemy ships that had once filled the skies were now nothing more than wreckage, drifting lifelessly above the planet. On the ground, the invaders lay scattered in the streets, their weapons broken, their cruel advance ended forever. The colony had been saved, but the cost was clear. Buildings stood in ruins, homes reduced to rubble, and the people who had survived were trembling in fear, not only of what had happened, but of what might happen next. The colonists looked up at the sky, where the massive human warships still hovered like dark giants. Their weapons glowed faintly, their engines rumbling like thunder. The people had never seen such power before, and even though the humans had saved them, fear gripped every heart. What if the humans turned that power on them next? What if the Deathworlders decided that the colony was too weak to deserve survival? The silence in those moments was heavy, filled with dread and uncertainty. Families huddled together, children clinging to parents, elders whispering prayers. The leaders of the colony gathered in their ruined command hall, debating in hushed tones what to do. Should they send another message begging the humans not to harm them? Should they offer tribute or surrender completely hoping for mercy? Every story they had ever heard about humans painted them as dangerous, unpredictable, and fiercely protective of their own. No one knew how they would treat outsiders. The tension broke when the first human transport ship descended. Its engines roared as it landed in the center of the colony's largest surviving plaza. Colonists scattered, some running in fear, others watching with wide, terrified eyes. The massive doors opened with a hiss and armored figures stepped out. The colonists braced themselves, waiting for violence, waiting for the final judgment. But what came was something they had not expected. The humans carried supplies. Crates of food were unloaded first, sealed and preserved for long journeys through space. Soldiers, still in their terrifying armor, set them down carefully in neat rows as if laying out gifts. Then came containers of clean water, followed by medical kits marked with red crosses that none of the colonists recognized but somehow felt reassuring. One soldier knelt down beside a wounded alien child who had been carried by her mother. With movements surprisingly gentle for someone dressed in armor, The soldier opened a kit and began to treat her wounds. The mother froze, unsure whether to pull her daughter away, but the soldier simply offered a small smile before carefully bandaging the injury. For the first time in days, the child stopped crying. The mother could only stare, overwhelmed by confusion and relief. Word spread quickly through the colony. The humans were not here to conquer. They were here to help. Their way of helping was strange, even frightening, but it was real. Colonists who had been starving for days were given food. The wounded were carried to makeshift medical stations set up by human medics, who worked tirelessly to save lives without asking for anything in return. Families hiding in the ruins were escorted to safer areas, shielded by the same soldiers who had brought destruction to the invaders only hours earlier. The people began to understand something that words alone could not explain. Humanity's mercy was not soft. It was not gentle the way other species might have offered. Mercy from humans came wrapped in steel and fire and warships and weapons. But beneath all of that fury, there was a compassion that could not be denied. The same hands that fired missiles to destroy the raiders now handed out bread and water. The same voices that shouted commands on the battlefield now spoke softly to the frightened children they carried to safety. The colonists were stunned. They had expected to be punished or ignored or perhaps enslaved. Instead, they were being protected. Instead of chains, they were given blankets. Instead of threats, they were given comfort. Every act of kindness from the humans carried with it a reminder of what had happened, that this kindness existed only because the humans had been willing to unleash unimaginable violence first. To the colony, it was a strange balance, one they could barely comprehend. As days passed, the humans continued to help rebuild what had been destroyed. They cleared rubble, repaired water lines, and shared their technology where it was most needed. Yet at night, their warships still hovered above, silent guardians that reminded everyone of the power behind their compassion. It was a warning as much as it was a comfort. For the colonists, this mercy was difficult to understand. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of it. How can a species so violent also be so kind? Some asked, is this kindness real, or is it just another form of control? Others answered, does it matter? We are alive, and it is because of them. The truth was that the humans did not think about it the way the colony did. To them, there was no contradiction. Protecting the helpless required strength, mercy required power, and sometimes the only way to save lives was through war. Children who once cried in fear at the sight of human soldiers began to follow them curiously, tugging at their armor, asking questions. Mothers who had hidden their children from view now watched with cautious gratitude as humans handed out food and blankets. Fathers who had once carried makeshift weapons against the raiders now stood in silence, realizing they had never stood a chance without the arrival of Earth's warriors. The leaders of the colony, humbled by their failure to defend their people, approached the humans with cautious words of thanks. They expected cold answers or demands in return, but the humans simply nodded and returned to their work. They asked for nothing, no tribute, no surrender, no allegiance. They only insisted that the colony's people be kept safe while they remained. Slowly, the colonists began to see humanity not just as saviors, but as something more complicated. They were fierce, terrifying, and unstoppable in battle. Yet they were also protectors, healers, and givers of hope. Their mercy was not the mercy of saints or angels. It was the mercy of warriors, mercy that came only after the enemy was destroyed. In time, the colony would rebuild. The scars of war would never fully fade, but the people would remember what had happened. They would remember how they had begged for mercy and how, against all expectations, it had come. It had come not in the form they imagined, not with gentle voices or open hands, but with the thunder of warships, the fire of battle and the quiet compassion that followed. And as the survivors looked to the skies, where the human fleet still stood watch, they knew one thing with certainty. Mercy from humanity was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was fierce, it was terrifying, and it was real. Beneath the armor, behind the weapons, there was a heart that refused to let the helpless die. The battle was over, but its memory did not remain only on that colony. Word traveled quickly, carried by traders, refugees, and travelers across the stars. Stories spread of how the colony had begged for mercy, and how the ones who answered were not healers, not diplomats, but humans. At first, many doubted the tale. It sounded impossible. How could such a small and unknown species strike down one of the most feared raider forces in the galaxy? Yet the survivors swore it was true, and the wreckage of the raider fleet became undeniable proof. Every retelling of the event grew sharper and stronger. In markets and starports, in quiet homes and busy stations, beings of all kinds whispered the same story. The Death Worlders had come. Some described them as saviors, powerful guardians who answered calls for help when no one else dared. Others spoke with unease, saying that humanity was not salvation but a storm, a force of nature that brought destruction as surely as it brought safety. Those who had not been there tried to imagine it. They pictured the skies filled with warships, weapons burning brighter than suns, and soldiers who moved like shadows through the ruins. They imagined the colony trembling as these strangers arrived, only to discover that their wrath was not directed at the innocent, but at the invaders who had brought suffering. For some it was a story of hope, proof that even in the darkest times someone would come to stand against cruelty. For others it was a warning. If humans could destroy so easily, what would happen if one day their fury was aimed at you? The leaders of other colonies began to talk among themselves. Some argued that humanity should be welcomed as protectors, allies strong enough to keep the galaxy safe. Others feared that relying on humans meant inviting chaos, because their way of helping was not peaceful. They did not ask for surrender or bargain with enemies. They simply unleashed war. For many civilizations that was a terrifying thought. But for the survivors there was no doubt in their hearts. They had lived the nightmare, felt the ground shake under the fire of human weapons, and seen their children carried to safety by the same soldiers who fought like demons. They knew one truth. Mercy from humanity was unlike any other. It was not soft or gentle. It did not come with soothing words or promises of peace. It came wrapped in steel and fire, in the unyielding will to fight for those who could not. They remembered the fear they had felt when the human fleet first appeared, and how quickly that fear had changed when the invaders were destroyed. They remembered how the humans gave them food, medicine, and shelter, proving that beneath the armor and the fury lay compassion. They remembered how survival, which had once seemed impossible, had been guaranteed by the arrival of warships from Earth. The story grew with every telling. In one version, the humans were described as angels of war, guardians who answered prayers with fire and steel. In another, they were called monsters who showed kindness only after devastation. Both versions carried truth. Humanity was both terrifying and merciful, both destroyer and protector. And perhaps that was what made them so different from every other species in the galaxy. For the colony itself, life slowly began to rebuild. Though scarred by the battle, they carried with them a strange pride. They had been saved by the most dangerous newcomers the galaxy had ever seen. Visitors often asked them to retell the story, to describe what it felt like to see human warships descend from the skies. The colonists always struggled to explain. They spoke of fear that turned to awe, of destruction that became salvation. They spoke of mercy that came not as a gentle whisper, but as a thunderous roar. Generations later, the story was still told. Children who had not even been born at the time grew up hearing how the humans came when no one else would. Some listened with wide eyes, dreaming of the mighty ships that could protect them. Others listened with unease, wondering if such power could one day turn against them. But no one could deny that the humans had changed everything. Across the galaxy, leaders began to watch humanity closely. Some reached out in friendship, hoping to form alliances. Others strengthened their defenses, preparing for the possibility that one day humanity's mercy might fall upon them as well. The galaxy had been given a lesson it could not forget. When humans answered a call for help, they did not come with speeches or promises. They came with warships, and where their fleets appeared, survival followed. The survivors of the colony never forgot that lesson. They taught their children and their children's children that humanity's way of helping was unlike any other. It was fierce, it was frightening, but it was real. It was mercy that could not be mistaken for weakness. Mercy that made survival possible, even when all hope was gone. And so the story of that day lived on, passed from world to world, becoming legend. To some, it was a tale of hope. To others, a tale of warning. But to those who had been there, it was the simple truth. Humanity's mercy was never soft, never gentle. But when humanity answered, survival was guaranteed.